everyone. I've prepared some premium steaks. As my husband Paul and I take our designated seats, our son's wife Linda brings in the steaks. She sets the plates in front of everyone but me, then sits down and starts pouring drinks. No need to label the steaks as premium. I'm pondering this when our son Brian notices my plate is missing and nudges Linda.
Where's Susan's portion?
Well, it's a family gathering today, right? Susan isn't really family, is she? I felt a jolt, like a blow to the head, but Brian and Paul almost immediately reprimand Linda. Their yelling was so loud, I worried it would wake the sleeping grandchild. No, it's okay. I'm not that hungry, I said, calming down an angry Brian and Paul. Linda, unapologetic, sips her tea and takes a big bite of her steak, looking content. This is delicious. How does it taste to you, Susan? Oh, I forgot. You're not real family, so we didn't prepare any for you. Sorry. Brian looks at Linda like he's eaten something bitter. True, I'm not Brian's biological mother. Brian is indeed the stepson from my marriage to Paul. I even insisted Brian call me Susan, not Mom. So maybe I'm not really family. But what about you, Linda? Are you truly family to Brian and our grandchild? I excuse myself to the bathroom, step out of the living room, and make a call. The peaceful, sleeping face of my grandchild flashes in my mind, and I press the call button on my mobile phone, my heart tightening with regret. My name is Susan. I married Paul, a divorced man, and raised his son, Brian. I met Brian when he was 7, a straightforward and affectionate boy, who quickly grew fond of me. When I officially married Paul, I was serious with young Brian. You don't have to call me Mom. Susan? That's fine, I said. Initially opposed to marrying a man with a child, my parents eventually understood and accepted Paul's character, allowing us to live happily as a real family. Brian moved out as an adult, living nearby. I always thought, if he's just minutes away in an apartment, why not stay at home with us? However,
guys have their things, you know,
Brian replied. What does that mean, guys have their things? Are you saying women don't?
No, not like that. Guys have their stuff, and so do women. Yeah, even dogs and cats have their own things.
Life became really easier and much more leisurely after Brian moved out and became independent. Paul runs an interior design company, working in the same office with Brian to prepare him to take over the business. As a housewife, after seeing Paul off to work in the early morning and finishing household chores, my greatest pleasure is sitting on my favorite sofa and reading. But to be honest, I'm not much of a reader. I tend to get sleepy just a few pages in. In fact, I read more to sleep comfortably. I feel a bit guilty for the authors whose books are used for such purposes. That's why I sometimes borrow children's encyclopedias from the library. Lately, I've been enjoying a rather plain hobby, looking through bird encyclopedias and matching the sounds I hear from the nearby grove to their sources. Gazing at the new greenery outside my window, the comforting chirps of birds from the encyclopedia resonate. Sitting on the sofa with a bird encyclopedia, I almost laugh looking at Paul's profile as he gazes at the sky. Cuckoos lay their eggs in other birds' nests, you know.
Brood parasitism, right? Saw it on TV. Crazy how they grow faster than the real chicks and kick them out of the nest.
It's indeed a remarkable instinct. The reason why cuckoos resort to this method isn't clear, but there must be a need for it. The thought that such a strategy is the best way to endure the survival of one's beloved offspring makes me feel terribly sad and lonely. Paul crossed his arms and made a deliberately puzzled face.
But it's a bit sneaky, right? Laying eggs and then leaving the rearing to others?
I chuckled softly, closing the bird encyclopedia in my hands. I revel in the trivial knowledge alone, quietly closing my heavy eyelids. These days continued for years, and Brian turned 30.
Brian has someone he wants you to meet,
my husband told me. On the next day off, Brian brought over Linda, a woman 3 years his senior, whom he called his fiancée. I was excited that day. It felt like something fun was about to begin. I looked out the window from the air-conditioned room. The strong sunlight might be making the nearby greenery scream. On that very hot Sunday in midsummer, Linda brought high-end sweets from a well-known store in a fancy paper bag as a gift. She silently handed it to me as soon as we met. I smiled, thinking she might be nervous. "Thank you. Make yourself at home," Linda replied curtly. "Thanks," while maintaining a distant attitude. Paul, excited to have his son's first girlfriend over, was relentlessly walking around the room. He came to the kitchen for no reason, circling behind me. As I put the kettle on and started making coffee for everyone,
"Where are these beans from?"
he asked with a puzzled face. "Overseas," I replied. I set the mugs of coffee in front of Brian and Linda, who were reading magazines in the living room, and we all faced each other. Brian, stroking our cat that had snuggled up to his feet, took a sip from his mug. Linda did the same.
"She's Linda. Dad knows, but we work together."
"Oh, I see. So I'm the only one meeting her for the first time," I said with a smile. Watching Linda's behavior, I wondered if I had done something wrong. She had been looking bored, glancing upwards and occasionally taking out her mobile phone restless. This was our first meeting, yet she remained silent, not introducing herself. Paul, sensing my thoughts, nervously prefaced,
"Actually, Susan," before revealing, "Brian consulted me in advance."
The visit was not only to introduce Brian's girlfriend, but also to announce Linda's pregnancy. It was unexpected, but Brian, who adores children, was thrilled and promptly proposed. The plan was to meet each other's parents as soon as possible. "I honestly wasn't thinking about marriage yet, so I'm kind of wondering what's going to happen now," Linda said, as if it was someone else's concern. I tilted my head, puzzled by her detached way of speaking. Maybe the pregnancy was unintended. Linda, still young, might lack awareness. As an experienced older woman, I wondered if there was any way I could help. "If you ever need anything, I'm here to help," I offered with the warmest smile I could muster. Linda glanced at me, then looked out the window with a tired expression and sighed softly. "You kind of sound sanctimonious."
"Hey, Linda."
"What? You got a problem with that?" "I don't want to get married. I'm only doing this because Brian insists." Brian dropped his shoulders, apologizing to me with his eyes. Paul, too, shrugged and looked down. I couldn't help thinking what a challenging fiancée Linda was. Her strong-willed nature was evident, but it seemed more about her asserting control in the marriage than mere assertiveness. Well, if Brian is fine with it, then it's okay, I suppose.
"Anyway, we want to do our best as a family of 3 with the child that's coming,"
Brian said earnestly. He already looked like the head of a family. Seeing his grown-up face, I couldn't help but shed a tear, thinking of him as a child. Linda, noticing this, muttered, "Seems fake." But everyone pretended not to hear. Brian tried to introduce Linda again, but she profoundly started telling her own story. Her parents owned a successful business, now mostly run by employees, as they had retired. From childhood, Linda had experienced typical lessons like piano, swimming, and art, as well as more fluent activities like violin and horseback riding. She boasted about her excellent grades and graduation from a well-known national university. "Which university did you graduate from, Susan?" Linda asked with a sly smile. From her expression, I sensed she already knew from Brian that I hadn't attended college. Indeed, I didn't go to college due to my family's financial situation and had to work, but I'd always tried to compensate by reading various books. Glancing at the unread books piled in the corner, I smiled wryly. I didn't go to college. My family was quite poor, so I had to work. Ah, I see. So you married for money as a second wife? Impressive. Linda burst into laughter.
Stop it, Linda. That's rude to Susan.
Brian rebuked her sharply. Linda pointed at Brian's face. I'll be bearing the heir to your company. I want to make it clear who should be prioritized. She declared. She was assertive, stating she was fine with not marrying, and even open to divorce if necessary. Her intimidating stance surprised me, and I received another silent apology from Brian. This was probably the worst first meeting, but I kept smiling, reassuring myself it was for Brian's sake. As time passed, the endless summer ended. Before I knew it, the scorching heat was replaced by a bitter winter, making me almost forget the existence of the hot season. In early summer, the cuckoos in the grove on the other side of the house were a daily alarm with their loud cries, but even that stress faded with the season change. On a frosty morning when my breath turned white, I received a call about Linda giving birth to a boy. Brian's voice over the phone was excited, overwhelmed with the joy of becoming a father.
He's born! Susan, he's born!
He exclaimed. Calm down. I calmly told Brian to keep his composure. Keep this Sunday free. I want to visit, I told him. Later, I went shopping alone for a gift. Knowing Linda's strong personality, I expected she might find fault with any gift. I chose a high-end baby outfit from a famous brand, had it wrapped and headed home. On my way home, I happened to pass by Brian and Linda's house and saw an unfamiliar man ringing their doorbell. I didn't plan to pay much attention, but then I saw Linda come out and chat cheerfully with the man. Something felt odd, so I discreetly took a photo with my phone. Seeing the man enter their house at Linda's invitation, I felt uneasy. Then, on the following Sunday, I visited my son and his wife's home with gifts to celebrate the birth of my first grandchild. Brian happily led me and Paul to the baby bed where our grandson lay sleeping. Paul and I admired the baby, discussing who he resembled while he slept peacefully. Everyone, I prepared some premium steaks. As Paul and I sat in our designated seats, Linda brought in the steaks and set plates in front of everyone but me. She then sat down and started pouring drinks. I was puzzled by her labeling the steaks as premium. When I hesitated, Brian noticed my missing plate and nudged Linda.
Where's Susan's portion?
Well, today's a family gathering, right? Susan isn't really family, is she? I felt shocked, but Brian and Paul immediately reprimanded Linda. Their loud voices made me worry they might wake the baby. No, it's okay. I'm not that hungry. I calmed the angry Brian and Paul. Linda, unfazed, sipped her tea and happily ate her steak. This is delicious. How does it taste, Susan? Oh, sorry. We didn't prepare any for you since you're not real family. Brian stared at Linda with a bitter look. True, I'm not Brian's biological mother. Brian, Paul's son from his previous marriage, even calls me Susan, not Mom. So maybe I'm not really family. But what about you, Linda? Are you really family to Brian and our grandchild? I excused myself to the bathroom, leaving the living room to make a phone call. Thinking of my peacefully sleeping grandson, I pressed the call button, feeling sorry. Soon, the doorbell rang. Wondering who it could be, Brian and the others didn't move, so I went to the door. Opening it, I greeted. It's been a while. I invited the visitor inside. In the living room, Paul and Brian were speechless.
Nancy, why?
I had called Nancy, Paul's ex-wife and Brian's biological mother. Nancy and Paul, both busy entrepreneurs, had divorced amicably due to their inability to manage family life. Knowing this, I had insisted to Paul that Brian maintain a relationship with Nancy. Eventually, we all became comfortable dining together, understanding it was unconventional. When Brian was getting married, Nancy suggested they stop meeting to avoid bad optics. Linda, unfamiliar with Nancy, was confused and struggled to respond to the sudden appearance of this woman. Nancy, without preamble, placed several photos on the table where everyone could see them. In the photos, Linda was arm in arm, smiling with a young man who was not Brian. "These are Linda and her ex-boyfriend, aren't they?" Her tone was sharp, a mix of question and confirmation. Linda, undisturbed by Nancy's provocative demeanor, responded, "Who are you? Do you enjoy taking secret photos?" Ignoring Linda, Nancy pulled out a card holder from her jacket and handed Linda a business card. Linda glanced at it briefly, noticing Nancy's name and her title as a detective. Linda frowned at me, as if accusing me of hiring the detective, then sat back down in her chair, arms crossed. "So Susan has a lot of free time. Hiring a detective to get photos of me accidentally meeting my ex? Must be satisfying for you." The photo alone wasn't conclusive proof of infidelity. "Sorry, if you wanted more steak, you could have just asked," Nancy said, unflinching. She stayed in her role as detective, not revealing her connection to Paul, and presented her findings. Linda was still romantically involved with her ex, even after marrying Brian. And they never actually broke up. When Nancy received the ex's name as David, Linda flinched momentarily, then glared at Nancy. "But, so what?" Linda snapped. Nancy, with a refined smile, "I gave this David a little money to share his story. He had quite an interesting tale." She continued. Fear twisted Linda's face. As I watched Linda's expression, I felt as if the temperature in the heated room was dropping rapidly. The one responsible for this chilling atmosphere continued to explain with a mischievous smile. I already knew the story. David, having been paid, claimed he was the biological father of Linda and Brian's child. Linda, upon hearing this, immediately denied it, crumpling the photo of her and David and throwing it. "I admit I dated David, but paying him to slander me? That's defamation. The newborn is truly yours and Brian's child, right? You're the worst, Susan. I don't want anything to do with you anymore. Brian, we're not meeting these people again. Get control of Paul's company fast." Linda yelled shrilly. I went to Brian and whispered in his ear, "Bring the birth records." Brian looked at me with a sad expression, as if searching for the real intention in my eyes. Eventually he stood up, fetched the records from a dresser, and handed them to me. Opening them, I saw the blood types listed. The blood type was incompatible with what could be expected from Linda and Brian's combination. Reacting to this, I exclaimed, "I don't mind doing a DNA test. That child isn't Brian's." After my declaration, silence fell upon the room, soon broken by the loud cries of the baby from another room, filling me with deep unease. We all remained silent for a while. Brian then stood up, picked up the baby from the bed, and began to soothe him. His awkward embrace, coupled with a fearful look, seemed like he was about to cry. Watching this, I regretted not revealing the truth sooner. The child Brian was holding was someone else's, as he well knew. It was a child he had no reason to love. The cuckoo's egg laid in another bird's nest I read about in the bird encyclopedia is often kicked out or abandoned by the parent bird, recognizing it as not their own. That child's cries or suffering are no longer Brian's concern, I thought. I wanted to take the baby from Brian, hand it to Linda, and throw them out, but I couldn't. I am tormented by such conflict. Nancy continued exposing Linda. Linda wasn't a president's daughter as claimed. Her parents didn't even have stable jobs. They were gamblers, and Linda, from a poor family, hadn't properly attended high school. She had been instructed to lie to friends, and had maintained the lie about being a president's daughter since the beginning of her relationship with Brian. I had always been suspicious of Linda's manners and speech, lacking the polish of a quality education. But considering Brian's excitement about the baby, I couldn't bring myself to investigate Linda. Brian, who had been silently comforting the child, eventually put him back in the crib. He hesitated, holding the small hand, then let go.
So you plan to make me raise that guy's child?
Wait, this is insane. Everyone's framing me. That child might still be yours, Brian. The blood type could be wrong.
Linda's frantic response suggested the possibility of the child being her ex's. Brian asked Nancy, "You have it ready, right?"
Nancy nodded, producing an unsigned divorce petition. Linda, realizing the seriousness, desperately clung to Brian's feet. But Brian slammed the divorce papers on the table.
"We're getting divorced right now, and I'll make sure to claim alimony."
I felt no sympathy for Linda, who continued to cry and apologize. She intended to make Brian raise another man's child while continuing her affair. "It turns out you were the one who married for money, not me." Until the very end, Linda glared at me with a look filled with hatred. She kept glaring at me, endlessly, relentlessly. Eventually, Linda and Brian divorced. Linda admitted to the affair, but remained vague about the paternity of the child, insisting on child support. Initially, Brian showed some sympathy towards Linda, but after I warned him that the half measures would only invite more trouble, he decided to take decisive action. When the DNA test results confirmed the child was not Brian's, something inside me, perhaps what could be called a conscience, quietly dissolved. The competent lawyer Nancy had arranged a hefty compensation from Linda. Linda's ex-boyfriend David, burdened with a significant debt and not wanting to get involved, quickly abandoned her and fled. With no savings or income from Linda or her parents, it was determined they couldn't care for the child, who was then put up for adoption. Linda, having lost her lover and child, became lonely and mentally ill, requiring medical treatment. Years later, Brian remarried a wonderful woman Nancy introduced him to, and they had a child. I made sure his new wife knew everything about the previous ordeal, ensuring that Brian had nothing to feel guilty about. She was understanding, even inviting Nancy to the celebration dinner when their child was born, which included Paul and me. There, the same steak was served, now a source of laughter among us. The steak debacle would eventually fade into a distant memory. Seeing Brian gaze sadly at his newborn, I impulsively patted his back. Just focus on raising your own child. If you worry about others, you'll neglect what's most important.
I know, but...
Brian is the father of this child. For now, that's all there is. I'm still troubled. Despite being someone else's child, I can't help but wonder about the life of the child abandoned by its parents. I live with this worry always. I bite into the steak, a few tears escaping. These tears are for Linda, just a little.